Hi, I'm Stéphanie. Are there still people coming in? Okay. First of all, super sorry about my voice. I've been sick for the last week. I might cough, so I really will try not to do that and not to destroy your ears, but sorry. Let's get started. Okay. This lasted 5 seconds, but I'm on stage and I'm stressed. So in my mind, this kind of lasted more like 2 minutes or something. What you need to understand about time is that there's two ways to measure it. You have objective time, which is the clock, optimizing your code. How long does my website needs to load, like real metrics you can have in the browser, things like that. And then you have psychological time, which is the perception. And this one is a little bit more complicated because it depends on a lot of things like stress and how motivated users are and stuff like that. So today I'm interested in the second part, and I want to show you some methods to help you build interfaces that will not only be fast, but will also be perceived as fast. So speed perception impacts user satisfaction, and you want your users to be satisfied because you want them to use your products. You want them to come back to your website. The first thing we can do is actually build responsive interfaces. And when I'm saying responsive, I'm not saying like responding to browser size and mobile optimization, but really responsive to user interaction. So between 0 and 300 milliseconds, what we need to have is like instant visual response. Things like that. Micro-interactions. This tells the users that their action was triggered and they can expect something. It kind of gives this impression of fluidity into your app and your websites. This is also an interesting opportunity to build CSS transformations, use animation, things we've seen like all day long this morning. Also note that you don't only need to trigger those on hover, you can also use like keyboard interaction, touch interactions. So there's a lot of interesting things you can do just with micro interactions. I hear a lot of developers complaining that their designers, they don't provide these kind of things. But for me, it's also the job as a designer. And what I usually do is like I provide those micro interaction in a style guide so that the developer don't have to go through 100 pages of sketch file to find like where did she put the hover effect of the menu again, things like that. So as designers, don't forget, document those kind of stuff as well. Between 300 milliseconds and 1 second, usually the time is like tolerable, so you don't really need to do anything about that. Between 2 and 5 seconds, well, user might think your system froze if nothing is happening, so you want to have this kind of loaders or spinners to indicate loading time. You can also be super creative, so I stopped the animation because I don't want you to be seasick. But again, remember the talk this morning about SVG? This is the kind of cool stuff you can do. Loaders don't have to be boring. You can have a fun cat. You can have like things moving around. So I'm going to go quick on that. Also, this is another way to show personality. This is Trainline is a... What's happening with the animations? OK. It's Trainline. It's an app that helps you buy tickets. And what they do, they have this really cute little train animation while you are waiting. So you don't need to go super crazy, but you can still like show your brand identity. Oh, yeah. OK, it's the clicker maybe. After 5 seconds, you are slowly reaching the frontier of your user tolerance. So they need more information if you want to keep them waiting. What you want to do is like first explain what will take time. Here, what will take time is transferring a file. The file is pretty big, so WeTransfer explains to me why it's going to take a lot of time. Then show advanced. How is it going? Like you can have percentage, things like that. The idea is really to give feedback, because if you want people to wait more than 10 seconds, they kind of need to know why. Also here it is percentage, but sometimes you can really measure that. For instance, in a file transfer system, sometimes if you don't know how long it will take, you could just say like 1 step or like 1 time out of 10, things like that. So the unit is really up to you depending on your system. Also, if possible, don't block users. Here what happens, like the file is really, really big, and it's telling, crap. It's telling me that it's going to take a lot of time. So what it did is like, I can cancel the animation. How about having something fun with a seagull? So I consulted with a friend, and he's working for a group that ships containers all over the world on big boats. This is important to understand the seagull. So he told me, yeah, we optimize everything possible. We optimize database, we optimize front end, and still some queries are super huge, so it takes 3 to like 100 seconds to load. So I explained to my friend, if it takes a lot of time, you can't just expect people to wait with a really nice spinner. You need something else. You need something interesting for them to do. You need to have more than just a spinner. So here is what their team came up with. So first, they replaced the boring spinner by a seagull. What's happening with the animations? Crap. Oh, it's working for you, okay. So, boring spinner replaced by a seagull, and this worked. You have to imagine, those people, their job is to ship containers. So this little creature, it speaks to them. So this is the corporate version of a fun loader. And then the second thing they did is like have some information about the company, about the things, so that users, while they wait, they have interesting things to read. Waiting time didn't change, but people stopped complaining with this technique. So another technique you can use is actually visual trick, animation, things like that. If you're stuck with a loading bar, there's one interesting trick. Usually, users remember the beginning of their experience and the end. So what you want to do is like speed it up a little bit towards the end, like whoosh. And this way, like, it won't change anything about the time, but it really changed the perception of speed for your users. Another interesting technique is like ribbons. So animation goes toward the left, and the ribbon goes the other way around. This, again, doesn't change anything about how long it is, but here, user perceive the waiting time as being a little bit less than what it is. You can also imagine having interesting transitions between pages instead of loaders. So this is done in Canvas, but you could do it in SVG as well. The idea here, it has two purposes. The first one is delight the users. Also, it's like a designer's website, so they kind of show off a little bit. But also, it gives them a little bit of time to actually load everything in the background while the pages are transitioning. Another interesting thing is like animating departures and arrivals on stage. So it comes from the left, and then when you remove it, it goes to the right. This is cool for two things. The first thing is that you can actually have some time to increment your JSON file or stuff like that to actually build the elements. The other thing is that it helps the users get a perception of what's going on into the interface. So when it comes to CSS animations, one big advice would be animate and transition, opacity, and transforms. Because they are kind of cheap to animate, cheap meaning they don't trigger repaint in the browser. The bad news is that your animation might make some people sick. Like, people have all sorts of disorders like vestibular or seizure disorders. So Safari introduced something interesting, which is a media query. So if you're on Mac or if you're Android, you can go into the accessibility settings and say, I prefer reduced motion. And you can check for that in CSS. And I'm not telling you to remove all the animations when this checkbox is checked, but you might want to tone down the animations that are going to be an issue for some users. Basically, everything that moves around. Like things that go bigger, smaller, like whoosh things like parallax effects, this kind of thing. So replace it by maybe something smooth and test it with real users if possible. So I applied some of those techniques on one of our Ionic apps. It's a home surveillance app. Users have Wi-Fi cameras in their home, and when there's an intrusion alert, they can ask for a recording of what's going on. You have to imagine that people who just got an intrusion alert are not willing to wait. They want to know if the cat was in front of the camera or if something is actually happening in their house. Unfortunately, when I discussed with the developer, I discovered that this was not going to be super easy. The format provided by the camera is not web compatible, and this is an Ionic app, so we're using HTML, CSS, JavaScript. So what we have to do is take the recording, bring it to our server, re-encode the damn thing so that we can actually bring it to the browser. So it means that you'll always have between 3 to 8 seconds at least of wait time. So to do that, we constructed kind of the wait in all the milliseconds I showed you before. Between 3 and 300 milliseconds, we have an interface transition between the pages. Then, if the video is still not in the browser, we are displaying the player to kind of make the user wait. After that, we don't know how long it's going to take, so we only can have a spinner. And then, once the video arrives in the browser, we buffer it, so we start playing it even if we don't have the whole video. This is what it looks like. So, transition, arriving, spinner, and then, poof, we play the video as soon as it arrives. And this helped a lot because users are not like freaking out while waiting. They are just like, the video is coming soon, they know something is happening, so it worked great. To communicate this with the development team, what we did is we used like one of the basic way of communicating animation, which is storyboards. So we split this into little kind of moments, and we shipped that to the developer to explain it to them. The issue is that this is really, really static. So the other thing we also did is basically everything I just explained to you with the 3 and 300 milliseconds, stuff like that, we put it into a document. So we have this like performance document, because this is going to be built on the client side, not on our side. So we have to explain to them kind of what we expect. In my Ionic example, I had to wait for the server response. But sometimes you don't need to wait. You can be optimistic and imagine that things are going to go well. A little bit like my clicker. So an example of that is Twitter. What they do, when you hit the button, they change the little heart, like yay, but they only increment in the number when you get the response from the server. So they're optimistic. They think that the like is going to work. So what they do is they already changed the visual thing. And if it doesn't work, wow, you unlike it, not a big deal. Back to my home surveillance app. We're not all Twitter, and the consequences of a failure for my app is not the same as for Twitter. So in this app, you can remotely switch on and off your alarm. And we have a dashboard for that. So we try to build this with the optimistic UI in mind. Once you click on like désarmer, you change it to armer and the other way around. We have a CSS animation here, and it switches directly inside the app. We trust our API. We are optimistic. We say, OK, it should work. So we change the state directly. But we're not Twitter. We can't just reverse it back and hope everything is going to be fine. If we do that, what will happen is like people think they have disabled the alarm, and actually it was not disabled. Someone will go into the room and then beep, it will beep, and then we go into the whole like intrusion alert, asking for the video, things like that. So it's really crappy experience if we just like switch it back. So what we need to do here is identify what might cause problems. So here we identify two things between the app and the server. So I click on the app, and then the message doesn't go to the server. Or the second point of failure would be between the server and the actual alarm in the house. Because crappy Wi-Fi, because something happened with the box and they don't have any Wi-Fi anymore. So what we do, we are optimistic, but in case of failure, we really, really quickly inform the users about the failure. We have two kind of ways to do that. If the user is still in the app, wherever they are in the app, we have this little toast at the bottom telling them, okay, it didn't reply, we switch it back, try later or something. If the user isn't in the app, we use native notifications. So they get a notification and the mobile say, okay, be careful, the alarm wasn't switched on or the alarm wasn't switched off, you need to retry later. I want to remind you, though, to be careful with notification. You wouldn't want Twitter to notify you every time you liked something and it didn't work, right? If you kind of abuse notification, like native notifications on mobile, user will turn them off. So use them, mostly when you have something urgent to tell to the users, like we have here. Another smart way to reduce perception is distract users from waiting time. So this is an experiment in Amsterdam. Yeah. Why? Okay, I'm just going to use the arrows. So it's kind of an art experiment. They put these little crocodiles on the windows, and then you can like cover your eyes and eat the people. Yeah. So what they do here, they are kind of distracting people where they're commuting, because commuting takes a lot of time sometimes. Unfortunately, we can't all put like little games and crocodiles in our apps, but there's still interesting things we can do about that. A well-known example of clever distraction is Instagram. When you take a picture on Instagram, then you get the filters, and you add a lot of things like tags and people and where you are, stuff like that. What Instagram does is that they don't wait for you to click on share to upload the picture to the server. So they start uploading here. Then when you actually hit the share button, there's a good chance that the image is already on the server, so they can display it directly in your timeline. If it failed, you kind of get a notification and it tells you like it didn't work, you can resend it later. So they're still dealing with the failures. But again, they're optimistic, but also like trying to make you do something else while you wait. We can also use placeholders and progressive loading content techniques to do this kind of things. They should work. Okay. Yeah. So what they do is like placeholders, the content appears as soon as it's possible. There's still a lot of content above the fold, but you don't see it. Also, the interesting thing here is that you can already interact with the content that was loaded at the top. Some studies showed that users will perceive sites as faster if they can interact with the content as soon as it's on the screen. So this is one of those techniques. Pinterest also has a lovely example. On the web, one of the most complicated and heavy things to load is images, but text, it's pretty easy to load. So what they do is that you have the text, but they extract the main color from the image, and then they build this grid with all the colors. And while you scroll down and while your images are getting loaded, you still have this kind of interesting experience where you don't have a blank page. You have everything loading smoothly. Regarding placeholders and skeleton screens, it's an interesting technique, but some studies showed that it doesn't always work. So my advice here is test it on your users. Some users might wonder what's going on, why do I have this kind of gray area on my screen or something? So if you use this kind of techniques, always make sure that it works for your users. Just because it works for Pinterest or another website, it might not work for your specific target audience. Also, sometimes it can backfire. Like LinkedIn used to have sidebars on the right, and then it went on the left. But they didn't change the skeleton screen. So this is one of those cases where, of course, users might wonder what's happening here, why do I have all of those little blanks? Because the skeleton screen and the final product don't match. I also worked on an image gallery. It's not as fancy as Pinterest. So I was working for a product to connect mechanics with car owners. You bring your car, maybe you want to repair the brakes. The mechanic discovers an issue like the engine. So what we have is this app where the mechanics can take pictures and videos and send it to the end client and tell them there's extra repairs, do you want to accept them or not? So we need to build this gallery of medias and videos. So the first thing we did is we went to car workshops to kind of understand how do those people use our app. And we discovered two things. The first one is they have a really, really slow, bad connection. Wi-Fi 4G usually is really bad because there's a lot of metal things around and it's kind of a little bit hard. So bad connection. The other thing is the mechanics, they share one device, which has some consequences. So again, I discussed with the developers to try to understand technically what's happening to build this gallery. The medias, they are deleted from the device. The mechanics are sharing a device, so at the end of the day, if they have a lot of medias on the device, there will not be any storage anymore on the device. So what we do is as soon as we get the images on our servers, we delete it from the devices, which means that to actually display the gallery, we need to fetch all of those images from our Amazon S3 servers. Another interesting thing they told me is they have a JSON file. And in this JSON file, they store the size, the media types, and the number of medias they have. And I'm OK, I can start working with that. So building it step by step. From the JSON file, I get the number of medias. So I can already kind of create this skeleton grid for my gallery. Then the other thing I get from the JSON file is the type of media. So what I can do is instead of having a blank gallery, is already have some placeholder and say to the user, this is going to be a video or this is going to be an image. Then, to make it a little more dynamic, what we did is we created a small pulsing animation for each of those little thumbnails, and we display progressively all the images as they arrive into the mobile app. So this is what it looks like. Yeah. Skeleton, pulsing animation, and then we have medias loading as soon as they're ready. The other interesting thing here is users actually don't have to wait for the gallery. If they just want to take a new picture, they can hit on new image or new video, take it, and usually when they come back, the gallery would have updated all the other images in the background. So that's a little bit of combo of all of those techniques. Then how did we communicate that with the developer? This time what we did is an interactive prototype in InVision. So InVision is a design tool where you can put different mockups, and then you can create this clickable prototype. It has an interesting feature where you can have a timer. So what we did is we built the GIFs for the different images, and we had a timer. So this is the prototype. The only thing with that is it's interesting, but don't use that for user testing, because here, every time the user will go into the gallery, I have this 8 seconds artificial wait time, because this is for the developer. So what I would advise is, if you want to test performance, test it on real coded prototypes, on real user connection. This is the most efficient way to do that. Okay, I spent the last 25 minutes telling you to go faster. But we live in a world where everything goes faster. Like, we build this user expectation where people get angry when something takes a lot of time to load. Do we want, from a philosophical point of view, to kind of embrace this area of everything needs to go fast? Also, does everything always need to go fast? Maybe not. Wells Fargo is a bank. They created something super interesting. They created a retina scanner so that users could log in by looking at their camera. And they put a lot of developer effort in that. They made it super fast, like really, really super fast, less than 1 second. And it backfired. Why? Because security is important. And our users have something called mental model. So a mental model is a way to see the world based on every interaction you already had. And eye scanning is pretty new. Like, people with an iPhone are kind of maybe a little bit used to it. But most of the model we have for retina eye scanning is from movies. And in those movies, the person goes in front of the thing and it's like, and then like, okay. So our users, they kind of have this expectation that eye scanning takes a lot of time. The good news is that mental model, they have evolution in time. So for the moment, it's a little bit complex. So what did they do? They added some extra waiting time, which I think for the developer must be awful. Like, we built this super fast thing, and we have to slow it down because users don't trust us. But basically, that solved their problem, because then, like, security is supposed to take time, and no one believed that their eye was actually scanned in such a little amount of time. Another place where you expect things to take time is when there's a lot of work put into it. So this is called the kayak effect, or a more scientific term, the labor illusion. What happens with kayak and the website like that? I know you're working. Okay. So it's supposed to take time. You expect this kind of website to search through the whole web to find you the best deal. And there's something with the users, which is we put more values into things when we think there was effort into those kind of things. And they had the same issue. They fetched a lot of results, and they did an amazing job on optimizing those, but users didn't trust it because, yeah, it can't be that fast. You know, you're supposed to fetch every airline website to bring me the best deal, you know. So this is the illusion of labor. If users think that something is supposed to take time because it has to work and do a lot of heavy lifting, well, you can't have a too fast interface. So what they did, they slowed it down. So again, it will get better eventually, but at the moment we have this kind of perception that some things actually need to take time. Conversation with chatbot, for instance. You could have a chatbot have an instant reply. The issue with that is, like, no human being is going to give you an instant reply. So if you want your chatbot to have this kind of natural language feeling, conversation-wise, you need to add this little thing, like when you type to a friend and they text you back, you see them like typing, you have that kind of thing. So it's the same for a chatbot. It's completely fake, but it kind of keeps the flow going, and it feels like a more natural conversation. So I've talked about a lot of techniques, but I must warn you that with great powers comes great responsibility. The first thing is, like, this talk is about perceived performance. Those techniques should not, and I insisted on the not, is like caps into my slides, replace front-end and back-end efforts. So you still need to actually optimize your loading time and performance in the browsers and in your app. This is in addition if you want to go like one step further to make a really, really great experience. Also, some of those might seem like we are trying to deceive the users. So we need also to be a little bit careful about that, because as designers, as developers, it's also our job to make sure that the things we put out in the world are ethical. So there's a lot of talks at the moment about ethics. And yeah, this is most certainly starting to go into some gray area about manipulation and like using psychology to enhance design techniques, things like that. So be careful about that, be conscious about that as well. We design in a privileged environment. Like when I was designing those, I was on a MacBook, super, really fast Wi-Fi connections. But my users, they're into those crappy environment. Like, yeah, I was designing things for nurses with really, really old computers and slow bandwidth. I was designing for those mechanics who had to share one device. And by the way, the devices were really old phones. So sometimes we really need also to go to the users and have this kind of reality check. What is it like for them? Because they're not into the same environment as us designers and developers. Performance is a team and communication effort. I can't emphasize that enough. And also, this might not be your top priority. Like the whole gallery I showed you, it took me 6 months to have this shipped inside the app. We ended up sneaking it in some of the release, because of course, there's a lot of other things you need to solve before kind of going into these really, really small little details. So be patient. It's worth it. One step at a time, start by having hover effects, small micro-interaction, and eventually you will go there. Because not all of our products are Pinterest, Twitter, and Instagram. Those are nice examples, but we can still adapt those for our products. And it's really nice to build functional, usable, not dribble, amazing-like interfaces. And it's also super rewarding, so thank you.